let's explain how to use the case study on risk ranking of hazards in feed. We'll be using the multi-criteria decision analysis tool that you have seen in the module to rank the food safety hazards in feed. First of all, you need to read the Codex guide on risk prioritization of hazards in feed that is attached to the module. So please read all the guide to get used to the methodology on how to identify and prioritize hazards. Then we'll be using table 1 where they have identified different risk criteria to prioritize different hazards. We have, for example, what is the percentage of feed samples that are having positive for a bacteria or exceeding a maximum limit if it's a chemical. Then what is the potential transfer of the hazard from the feed to an edible product, meaning a muscle like chicken breast, pork meat, beef, right? Or even liver. So what is the potential transfer to those? Then what is the toxicity of the chemical? So what is the maximum allowable daily intake for that chemical? Or what are the number of outbreaks of cases if it's a bacteria? And finally, what is the feed availability of that specific feed ingredient? If it's readily available in your country or it's really hard to find and it needs to be imported. Then once we have identified the risk criteria, we need to add scores to each of the criteria. For example, for occurrence level in feed, we have less than 10% of the samples positive, between 10 and 25%, or more than 25%. We do the same thing for each of the risk criteria, right? We identify the scores, and then that means that we can have a low score, a medium score, or a high score that we need to normalize. So if it's a low score, we'll be normalizing by applying a 0 as a score. If it's medium, we apply 0.5, and if it's a high, we apply 1.01 as a score. Then finally, we need to apply different weights because remember, all those criteria will have a different impact and influence on risk. For example, in this case, based on Codex, they identified the transfer from feed to edible product as the criteria that had the highest impact on risk with 40%. Of course, all the weights, they need to sum up to 100. So what we need to do is we need to multiply the normalized score here, either 0, 0.5, or 1, multiply by each weight. Let's see how to do that. We have two different examples. Salmonella in a vitamin premix. So first of all, you need to identify information in your country, based on published reports or going to FAO or any guides and looking for information in your country for that specific feed matrix. So for example, here, I show you the example on how to assign a risk score for each of the risk criteria. In this case, let's assume, right, that between 10 and 25% of the samples of vitamin premix having positive for Salmonella. So that percentage equals to a normalized value of 0.5. If I multiply that by the weight, that equals to a risk score of 0.075. If I do the same thing, I multiply the normalized score by the weight. At the end, I sum up all the risk scores and I get the final risk score, 0.725. That's the final risk for Salmonella in vitamin premix. If I look at another example of aflatoxins in cornmeal, I do exactly the same thing. I'm trying to find information in my country or in other countries, right, for what is the presence of aflatoxins in cornmeal. And then I assign a value for aflatoxins in cornmeal. I multiply by the normalized value by the weight, and then I sum up all the risk scores, and at the end, it's 0.65. So if I compare Salmonella in a vitamin premix with aflatoxins in cornmeal, I see that Salmonella has a highest impact. It's a highest priority for me because it has higher risk score. So this is the case study. So I'm asking you to do the same thing, the same example with the activity. So you need to identify 2 microbiological hazards, 2 chemical hazards, use this table, right, to assign risk scores, multiply the risk scores by the weights, right, as we have seen, and I want you to calculate a final risk score for each of the hazards and send the activity, right, through the module and tell me what is the main priority of hazards in the feed. If you have any questions based on this case study or the activity, you can send me a question through the forum, and I will be happy to answer any questions that you may have.